What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and today I'm going to talk about one of the details of competitive play in tabletop games that can often get a little overlooked, and that is the issue of slow play and stalling in tournaments and what you can do about it. So, what is slow play? Slow play is just when you're playing slowly. It's very possible to do this by mistake, and I actually think probably most players of competitive card games have probably had an experience where they've been faced by a tough choice and spent maybe a unusually long, maybe even an inordinate amount of time thinking about what to do without realizing it. And in Star Wars Unlimited, that can be, which of these cards do I want to resource? They're all really good in this matchup. Like which is the best one? Like which can I most afford to get rid of? Uh, there are other decisions like which of these opposing cards should I take out first? There's all kinds of stuff like this, and there are decisions like this in almost all games. Sometimes people call this process of taking a long time on a specific decision tanking or going in the tank, and they're like, oh, he was in the tank for a while on that play or whatever. And it's important to note, this can be bad, but it's not really malicious. It's not actually a like it's not like any sort of major issue necessarily. It is a thing that you should be conscious of and you should try to get faster at if you're going to try to play competitively. But it is not it's not cheating. It's not a it's not a huge problem. It's just it is something that happens in these games. Now, there is a difference though between slow play and tanking versus actually stalling. So stalling is stalling is where you're intentionally delaying the game through taking an inordinate amount of time to make moves on purpose in order to try to run out the clock. And this might surprise some people. I know that there are sports and stuff where that's considered a valid tactic. Maybe, people really, really slow roll it in football or whatever, to try to run out the clock. But in a lot of card games, stalling is actually considered cheating. Um, and an example of when someone might stall is, let's say you're playing a best of three, you win game one, the second game is in progress, you think you're probably going to lose, it's taking a fair amount of time, and you think, if I were to waste enough time, this second game would not finish. And if this second game doesn't finish, then the fact that I won round one means I actually win this match. And from this perspective, why bother trying to win game three if you can stall out game two instead and just win based on the first game that you were already victorious in? Now, I want to stress, um, not everyone might even know that this is considered cheating in a bunch of games. But in a lot of competitive card games, intentionally stalling like that is considered cheating. It's not considered competitively valid. Um, but there's a big problem that then arises, which is how do you enforce that? So stalling is very difficult to catch, and there are two main reasons. So first off, what is or isn't slow play or stalling is it's quite subjective to assess, and it's difficult for an outside observer to tell what's going on. Someone can easily say, "Hey, I'm not stalling, man. I just have a tough decision. I'm just trying to figure out what to do here." And quite frankly, in a lot of cases, that could actually be true. And it's difficult because, of course, an actual cheater could say the same thing. Now, second, many players are averse to getting judges involved. And in principle, it should be fine to contact a judge and say something like, "Hey, I'm worried that our pace of play will not allow us to complete the match in time. Could you maybe come help us out?" And the judge can come over to the table and tell someone playing slowly, "Hey, I need you to make a play," and so on. I've done this. I believe I've done this before, or seen it done before in L5R tournaments, in at least one case. Um, but rightly or wrongly, this sort of thing is parsed by many players as being aggressive behavior, or maybe they don't even think it's aggressive. Maybe they just think it's a bit rude, and people don't do it as often as they perhaps should. And if you wait until you're like very confident that the situation is bad and the game is going too slowly, and then call the judge, you might have already lost a lot of the round time coming to that decision. So it can be difficult. Now, so what's to be done about this? Well, there's a gold standard answer in a lot of competitive games. That's the use of chess clocks. So a chess clock is a device that has two built-in countdown clocks, and it has buttons on top. And when you hit the button, it starts one of the clocks and it stops the other one. And each clock has half the match time, and one of them is counting down at a time. When it's your turn to move, your clock is counting down. And after you make your move, you go and push the button, and then your opponent's clock starts counting down instead. And if you run completely out of time on your clock, you lose. It's just over. And there are variations of this. There's versions with digital clocks where you get a small amount of additional time after each move. There are various different ways to handle that. Some systems have, if you run out of time, you don't immediately lose, but you just skip your turn and you can't take any voluntary action and your opponent just gets to play things out, which is pretty close to losing, but not quite the same thing. But anyway, regardless of the specific implementation, and like what the exact rules are, chess clocks, there are a lot of ways to use them, and they can be really effective because they eliminate the subjectivity of evaluating slow play, and they prevent one player from using more of the time in the match than their opponent. So chess clocks have been adopted. It's not just in chess, they're in many other tabletop games. There are board games that use them. There are miniatures games that use them. But in physical card games, they aren't that widely adopted. And so why is that? If chess clocks are such a good solution to the like slow player stalling issue in tournaments, why aren't they more used in card games? Well, there's actually a kind of a funny answer, and that is many competitive card games have timing structures that are too complicated for chess clocks to be practical. So if you're playing Magic the Gathering or you're playing Flesh and Blood TCG, those games have complex timing structures. There are cards that you can play after your opponent plays a card, but before that card actually resolves. There are a bunch of windows where players can play these instant speed effects, so you actually pass priority back and forward a lot. It's like, oh, do you have any instance? I had to clear this attack. Do you have any instance before we move to the blocking step or whatever? And there are so many timing windows in these complicated structures that you would have to be hitting the button on the chess clock over and over again as you pass back for each window. And it just isn't really viable to use it in that format. You'd have to use it too many times and too often. In chess, you hit the button after you make your move. Your opponent makes the move, they hit the button, very straightforward, and there aren't the same degree of interrupts and stuff. Now, in digital card games, there is a relevant difference. In digital card games, you often see some kind of automated timing system. Might not be I don't think it would usually be exactly a chess clock system, but because a digital game can very easily, determine whose turn it is just on a software level, these sorts of time enforcement things become more viable there. And sorry, guys, still a little sick here, still recovering. But the but there's a really cool thing going on, with Star Wars Unlimited in particular, which is Star Wars Unlimited actually has a timing structure that isn't super complicated. And if you ask me, it is entirely possible that we will see chess clocks being used in high level competitive events in Star Wars Unlimited because they're a great solution to the slow play problem, they're a great solution to the slow play problem, to the stalling problem. They make things way more objective. They also create a situation where if you have to go in the tank in a chess clock system, that's fine. You might be able to make up for it by having other turns that are easier to do and playing those quickly and using more of your time reserve on those important decisions without that being an issue for the game as a whole. And that's really cool as a feature. Now, I do not think people are going to be using chess clocks in casual play. It's a fair amount of setup. These days I'm sure there's chess clocks apps you can have on your phone. You don't need like a physical clock, but it's another thing you might have to bring to an event or whatever if you were doing it that way, or the tournament organizers have to supply them, which would be a bunch more logistics on their end. So that adds some complexity, but the and I don't think you're going to see this on the casual level of play. But for those larger competitive events, chess clocks could be a great solution, and it's kind of it's another advantage that Star Wars Unlimited has to offer with a simple, it has a timing structure that is simple to understand. You got the nice back and forth, and not only does that add some cool strategic depth without having to have too much complexity, it also means that chess clocks might well be viable because there aren't all those timing windows to mess them up. And that could be a great advantage that Star Wars Unlimited has over some other games when it comes to figuring out time rules for competitive play. So, yeah, are we going to see that for sure? I don't know. Maybe Fantasy Flight won't want to do it. Personally, I'd be very excited to see chess clocks at high level tournaments, but you know, who's to say? And the really big major tournaments Fantasy Flight is running aren't going to start for about a year or so anyway. So, I'm sure they're going to have some time to work it out. But I just thought this was a cool aspect of the game design and one that could be quite helpful. So yeah, that's going to do it for this one, guys. Sorry for all the coughing, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.